Well, let's get started just so we stay on track with time. First, I just want to say hi, folks. It's great to see everyone. It's a good turnout today, and just a big thanks for joining us and listening into these incredibly important discussions. This is such valuable information. I'm really happy we're all here to hear it. As we enter the last leg of today's talks, we're going to hear from some people around the state who are leading efforts in their region around cooperative food systems, food-based economics, and the education going into these efforts. So for our next presentation, titled Local Cooperative Projects That Are Making the Shift to a Local Food Economy, we'll hear from two women who truly are leaders in the Dayton community, Lela Klein and Cherrelle Gardner. Both of these women have done incredible work, but I'm going to just do a really short intro to keep us on track with time. So Lela is the co-executive director for Co-op Dayton. She's an extensive background in economic justice for working people and has organized multiple labor union movements. Cherrelle Gardner is currently the program director at Co-op Dayton and has acted as a facilitator and leader in regional diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So let's go ahead and get started. Please remember to keep yourself muted while the presentation's happening. Do type any questions into the chat box and I'll answer those right around 2:15 when we start the questions. So welcome, Lela and Cherrelle.
Thank you. I'm going to try to do a screen share. Let's see. Can you guys see this presentation now? Is this good? Does this work?
Yep, that's perfect.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Alex just introduced us, so I won't belabor that, but it's really exciting to be here. And my colleague Cherrelle and I are happy to talk a little bit about the work we're doing in Dayton. So Co-op Dayton is the organization that we both work for. We are a nonprofit organization that has a mission to promote, in particular, worker ownership and community wealth building and the use of the cooperative economic model. And we do that by developing new startup businesses that we support, both businesses that we kind of think up and also businesses that are started by others that we support. And then we also support the transition of existing businesses to employee ownership. We're currently working with 5 businesses around the kind of greater Dayton area to transition to employee ownership. And in some cases, that's a means of allowing a retiring owner to exit their business. In other cases, an owner wants to broaden opportunities for ownership in order to reward and retain talented employees. Our long-term vision is a network of interconnected cooperatives that support each other and keep dollars in the local economy here in the Dayton area. And we really see this as, part of an effort towards a solidarity economy as an alternative to the kinds of businesses that are, really driven by decisions being made in boardrooms, potentially 3 states away, or that are, purely for the benefit of a few, where kind of key decision making is happening in ways that doesn't include key stakeholders that are impacted. I know that other folks, I know the ACENet was just up, so this is probably a review, but a cooperative is a business that's owned and controlled by its own members for the benefit of those same members. Those members can be producers, workers, consumers, but the idea is that ownership, control, and benefit are all kept within the sort of ownership membership group. The way that we would like to look at it in Dayton is that we use the cooperative model to leverage the unique gifts and talents that we have as a community that already exist in our community. And we leverage those gifts and talents to meet our own needs that we've identified. So it's really a lot about community self-determination. This is a picture of the board of our community real estate investment cooperative, Unified Power. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Cherrelle.
Thanks, Lela. So there are lots of different types of cooperatives, and really there's a lot of gray area between the different types, and we try to group them into these categories: consumer co-ops, producer or purchasing co-ops, worker co-ops, and multi-stakeholder co-ops. And the ones that we're going to talk about by highlighting our work are producer, worker, and multi-stakeholder co-ops today. And then Lela touched on this, and I'm sure you've already heard somewhat about this today, but really what is the difference between the traditional company model and co-ops? And it comes down to those three things: ownership, control, and benefit. And why worker co-ops specifically do we advocate for, or some sort of combination that allows to have a worker class? Well, for the workers, it creates dignity and good paying jobs, allowing the community to build wealth and for the company to build wealth within itself. For the community, it retains good jobs that pay family sustaining wages in your community and circulates the dollar locally. And then for business, we've seen higher rates of employee retention across the nation for worker co-ops, and higher sales and productivity that increases the amount of growth in the company.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we kind of call our flagship project, which is the Gem City Market. The Gem City Market is a project in Dayton, Ohio. We are mere weeks away from opening. If I look tired, if there are bags under my eyes, it's because this is like, we're down to crunch time getting the store open. I spent like 80 hours in the store this week. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we got here and how it connects to our efforts for a more resilient local economy and a more resilient local food system. So the Gem City Market is a project that really grew out of a group of neighborhoods and neighbors in Northwest Dayton. So Northwest Dayton is Northwest and West Dayton are an interesting part of town. There is a history of hyper-segregation in Dayton. So most Dayton neighborhoods are like either vast majorities white or vast majorities Black. There's very, very few neighborhoods that are actually fairly well integrated. And the Northwest part of Dayton, currently the neighborhood that we're operating in is about 80% African American, with a median household income of about $28,000. The neighborhood has a history of being redlined. So it's interesting because there's a mix. There were racially restrictive covenants. So there were some little pocket neighborhoods in Northwest Dayton where people of color were not legally allowed to buy homes before racially restrictive covenants were ruled to be unconstitutional. But then there's also a history of redlining. So in other census tracts and pockets of the neighborhood, there were rules put in place that essentially stopped traditional bank lenders, mortgage lenders from lending because the federal government had essentially designated certain neighborhoods too risky. And that when the neighborhood was considered too risky, it was redlined. There was a red line around it. And it was because that neighborhood was predominantly African American, or in some cases, heavily immigrant or Jewish. But in Dayton, most of the historically redlined neighborhoods correspond basically directly to to neighborhoods that are predominantly African Americans, and also neighborhoods that have what we call low opportunity. So back in kind of around the time of the original recession, the 2008 recession, most of the conventional grocery stores in Dayton, especially in Northwest Dayton, started to either close or reorganize. So this neighborhood lost a Kroger in 2009, and then subsequently lost a couple of other stores, and then an Aldi in 2017. There was the housing crisis, a lot of mortgage foreclosure, and so a lot of vacant homes. That was just the continuation of a longstanding trend of white flight and sort of the flight of capital and divestment in the neighborhood. But with grocery, kind of the loss of grocery in 2009 being a pretty significant blow to the neighborhood. There's a process called opportunity mapping, which in our case was led by the Kerwin Institute at Ohio State. Neighbors in Dayton and the public health organization in Dayton did opportunity mapping to sort of map the geographic ways that opportunity is distributed in Dayton, and found these, pretty startling results. Although if you live in Dayton, it wasn't exactly a surprise, but that, our opportunity in our community is extremely segregated, with the vast majority of white people living in high opportunity neighborhoods and the majority of African Americans living in low opportunity neighborhoods and very low opportunity neighborhoods. So with all of that said, out of that opportunity mapping process, a bunch of different kind of focus groups were formed. So the opportunity mapping was done in a very public and community engaged way. And then we formed breakout groups to talk about the different ways in which opportunity was distributed. And there was a food focus group that formed out of that process. This is back in like 2014, 2015. And out of that food breakout group, people started talking about, could we open our own grocery store? We know that there are, 40,000 people living without access to fresh and healthy food. How can we solve that problem ourselves? And we did a lot of study and research, and we started to learn more about cooperatives inspired by work that was happening in Cincinnati and certainly in Athens and across the state and the country. We started working on the project in earnest in 2016. And so you can see it's taken us 5 years to get to where we're just about to open. The first thing we did was to kind of do some traditional market research to be able to select a site that would both be in what we call a food desert, the area that is impacted by lack of grocery, but also that would be a sustainable site for a grocery store, enough kind of retail potential to actually sustain a grocery store. And then we actually incorporated our cooperative in 2017 and started selling memberships. So that's kind of the beginning of how things got going. We really put a priority on community engagement from the very beginning. So one of the first big things we did after we had a market study that a traditional, business third-party market analyst did a market study that showed that Lower Salem Avenue in Northwest Dayton was the best location. We didn't stop there. We followed that with a big community survey. We had 1,200 people take our survey, and that didn't happen by accident. That happened because we literally sat at bus stops and went door to door and went to places where we knew people would gather, went to churches. We used the survey as an organizing tool to really bring in feedback, bring in people. Everything we've done has been with really intense community feedback. So even our architectural process, we had neighbors and community members. We had open office hours at the library with our architects where neighbors and community members could come in and provide feedback. We had online portals for people to provide feedback. We had big town hall meetings. And then we always have big community meetings. Back when we used to be able to all be in the same room together, we would do that in church basements. Now we do it on Zoom, which is not as much fun. We've also done a ton of door knocking in our neighborhood, canvassing. We allow our member owners actually vote on key strategic decisions. So ownership culture is really at the core of what we're doing. We also engaged in a traditional philanthropic capital campaign in order to raise the money to build the building. We knew that this is going to be a low margin business, so we wanted to provide very low occupancy costs to the eventual market. So we actually were able to raise grant dollars and philanthropic dollars to actually build the physical building, which if you come to Dayton and see, it's a very beautiful building. We were really blessed to have a local kind of hunger champion, Ambassador Tony Hall, who had been longest serving congressman from this area, and then like a known advocate for hunger, including being the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican dealing with hunger issues. And then I'll just give a shout out. I see Tony Dosick is on the call, and she was also really instrumental in our capital campaign as our sort of capital campaign guru. I had never run a capital campaign, and she comes out of the nonprofit world. So she really supported our work. Hi, Tony. And we built really strong partnerships with neighborhood groups, churches, and then also some of the bigger anchor institutions in Dayton. And we were able to use grant money to really do a lot of the development work. So the market itself, when it opens, you'll see these are old renderings. And so the actual kind of color design has changed, but you can kind of get a sense of what the building will look like, or it does look like now. It's a 15,000 square foot building, which includes not just the 8,000 square feet of grocery, but also some other functions, which I'll mention later. It's owned 70% by the employees, the actual operations of the market, and 30% by the community. We currently have since I wrote this slide, we actually have over 3,500 members. Those are people across the community who have decided that they want to have an ownership stake. They put their skin in the game. The ownerships are $100 for a typical member, but they're $10 for households that are low income. And then we also have a separate class of ownership for just people who probably won't shop at the store but want to support us, called supporting memberships. So we've been able to raise a lot of equity for the business through that ownership structure. We have about 50% of our owners live in our immediate trade area. That's like the neighborhood right around us. And then 10%, we do that based on zip code, so it's not perfect, but about 50% live right around us. And then about 10% have identified themselves as low income and taken advantage of that the $10 membership. We're hoping that that number will grow. One of the questions that was asked by the organizers of the conference was like, kind of what are the challenges to projects like this? And so I'll just say, like, I think all of us would agree access to capital is a real challenge. We had to be really creative in terms of knitting together financial sources to make this project a reality and a possibility, including those memberships, which I mentioned. So that's how we raised about $500,000 through membership, including those supporting members. But we also use some innovative other ways to bring capital into the project, including program-related investment, which is it's essentially a loan from a foundation typically at like a lower rate of return. So it's a mission-based loan from a foundation. So we have just over like $350,000 in PRI, which is relatively innovative. That's kind of a new way to bring capital into a project. We also have been able to get lending from community development financial institutions through a national program called Healthy Food Financing Initiative. And specifically here in Ohio through the Healthy Food for Ohio funds through our partners at the Finance Fund. We also, as I said, we raised about, I think, $3 million in grants and donations. And then we also got support from the government at the local, county, state, and federal level. We have we have a lot of goals, including community wealth building, including kind of just straight up access to any food, but we really want to prioritize local food. So in our business plan, we say that we have a goal of 15% of the products on our shelves through every department being local. But we hired a general manager who herself is a local farmer and chef, and she wants to beat that. So her goal is to have 20% of our products be local, including our produce, meat, pantry staples, coffee, beer. So I think it'll take some time to ramp up to that, but I do believe that we will get there. We also have great relationships with Ohio State University Extension and Central State University Extension to kind of help us and help local producers kind of get ready to come to market. We have 3 levels of local that will be like readily identifiable in the store. So we will have special signage for anything made in Ohio. That's level 1. Level 2 is anything made in the Miami Valley as defined kind of by the river, the watershed. And then our 3rd level of local is anything actually made in West Dayton and Northwest Dayton. So that's like anything made to the west of the river in the areas that have traditionally been divested and redlined. So as a customer, you'll actually be able to make decisions with your dollars to support local in those 3 different ways. It's funny looking at these renderings. It's actually surprising how much the store actually looks like this. We just, it's fun. So I wanted to just mention it's more than just a market. It's important to us, that we really meet operational excellence and that we operate as a really great and sustainable grocery store, but that wasn't enough. We know it's not enough to just open a grocery store. You actually have to kind of promote a culture of health. So we've also built into our plans in partnership with a local hospital, a teaching kitchen where we can teach cooking classes. We have about 12 different partners who are signed up to teach cooking classes on a regular basis. And we've partnered deeply with a local grassroots community health nonprofit that will be actually coordinating all of that programming. We also have a small clinic space where 5 Rivers Health Centers, which is a federally qualified health center, will be operating kind of like a minute clinic 3 days a week. We will have WIC, women, infant, children. We will have WIC staff on site 1 day a week, all day, doing they have a visit with WIC recipients where the recipients have a health visit and then they get certified for their benefits. They get to load up their benefits card and then they can come right out and use it in the grocery store. And we're surrounding that with other programming for moms and babies. So that'll be calling that Mamas at the Market on Tuesdays. And then we have a number of other kind of healthcare services that'll be offered either out of the clinic or in our community room. Our community room seats about 40 people and is a really beautiful space for yoga classes, meditation, Girl Scout troops to meet, community meetings, health awareness classes, things like that. So we really built community togetherness into and a culture of health into the DNA of the building. So I've got a couple pictures. So this is a rendering with the new color scheme. And this is also a rendering. But here you can actually see the actual building. This is just about a week ago. So this is the front facade and front doors, front sliding doors. You see it's still under construction, but we are really getting there. This is one of our board members in the yellow, Chevelta Harding, who is giving a tour to community members. For the past couple weeks, we have been giving tours Monday through Thursday to our members, and they sign up for tours and we bring them in groups of 3 to 5, socially distanced with masks. And it's been amazing. I mean, these are folks who have been waiting and have invested their money and have been ready for this co-op, and people are just pumped. People are really excited. We've also been giving some tours to our partners. So this is, and there's 5 of us who've been giving tours, and Chevelta, one of our board members, is one of them. So here she is giving a tour. This is what she's pointing at is the beginning of our meat department, and right behind her is our produce department. And then here's another angle of the interior of the store. To the right is the kind of about a third of the produce area. So where you're standing in the picture, you would be kind of in a display of produce on a produce merchandiser. And then looking directly in front of you is the deli case, the prepared food section. And then to the front and to the right is the door that goes into the clinic. And over there, kind of in the corner past the door, is the meat department. And then to the left is all kind of dry goods grocers. So you can, you're looking at, essentially like maybe like an eighth of the store right here. And I think that's it. This is some of our members at our last community meeting before COVID, when we were still allowed to be in person. And the person all the way on the right is Amaha Selassie, who's my co-founder, co-executive director, and he's also the board president of Gem City Market. All right, turning it over to Cherrelle to talk more, and then we'll take questions at the end, both of us.
Thanks, Lela. So in addition to Gem City Market, going back into trying to build this network of cooperatives, the Just Economy Network, we also had groups approach us about wanting to start farm cooperatives, and Guided by Mushrooms and Gem City Gardens are the 2 projects that we're working with now, both worker owned and located in Dayton. There we go. So Guided by Mushrooms is a specialty farm. They're a 3-person owned, worker owned farm. They used to be a family owned farm and are converting with us to a worker owned farm. They grow right now at about 1,500 square feet and produce both fresh mushrooms and mushroom products, including spices and jerkies, and there are lots of fun things you can do with mushrooms. Right now, they're selling to restaurants, boutique grocery stores like Jungle Gyms and Dorothy Lane, and then they're selling their spices and dry products on Etsy. They are owned by people of color, women, and veterans. And going back to the questions that the conference organizers wanted us to answer, some of the resources that really made them successful when they started back in 2018 was the ability to start producing on a super small scale on property that their family owned. So they started out in a garage, and then once they had built their customer base, they actually gave up their entire home, moved into a mobile home, and converted their entire house into a mushroom farm. And so Co-op Dayton early on started by helping them with market research. So we were able to identify its gourmet restaurants and boutiques that are really going to be interested in your products. And we've been working with them to do some financial modeling as they prepare for their expansion. So even despite COVID, they were able to pivot and completely sell out every week. And so they need to expand and are looking to quadruple their production. And so we're helping them with financial modeling and putting together their financial documents and preparing them to be able to expand to do both direct sales, farmers markets, and they want to launch a CSA. Some challenges we're having is that mushroom farms actually grow indoors, at least the type of growing that they choose to do. And the city is just having some challenges figuring out how to zone us appropriately. Um, and so that's been a huge challenge. Funding this expansion has been a challenge. You know, they were able to just really bootstrap it, give up their home, put in their savings, get some family money, and get that off the ground. But this project is going to cost over $100,000. So we won't be able to do that here. And so figuring out how to finance such a unique project has been a little bit challenging. And also getting the documentation together for funders. So I guess in a testament to how amazing their products are, they've been running for over a year and a half with no contracts. They just have loyal customers. And so now getting customers to put it in writing that you will order a set amount per week and getting them to the capacity where they can produce that regularly every week is another challenge we're trying to figure out to tackle. And because they are just super talented and want to do this themselves, they want to do all the pre-development work for this expansion. So finding contractors who are able to use this kind of a teaching experience to help them develop a really unique farm that doesn't exist in Ohio like this has been another interesting challenge. And I see questions in the chat, but I have 3 minutes and then I'll get to them all. Gem City Gardens is another farm that came to us wanting to be a worker co-op, also inspired by Gem City Market and seeing the opportunity to be a local producer. They're currently owned by Katie and Posey, so a 2-person worker-owned farm, and they are going to be growing on about a 1/4 acre in East Dayton. Focusing on organic and regenerative practices. They actually want to have more of a relationship with the consumers. So they're primarily going to be focusing on farmers markets as well as grocery stores and restaurants. And they are currently a women-owned business, but will expand as their business expands. Some of the resources that have been key to their success so far is they have a really strong relationship with Easton Community Center, which is helping them acquire the land. They just text me today and they're so close. They just have to sign the paperwork and get it over to the county, and that 1/4 acre will be theirs. Dayton Urban Grown is where they've done all their training, and they're currently managing Dayton Urban Grown to get experience of what it'll be like to manage their own farm. And then Co-op Dayton, they went through our design incubator program and are currently receiving ongoing coaching from me. And the next step, so they are preparing to start operating their farm once they get the land. So they're going to be doing all the soil testing and getting the land prepared to start farming. They're looking to fundraise, and Kiva is one of the things that they had talked about wanting to do, as well as grants that they're applying for to purchase equipment. And then, like I said, they're working to learn how to manage a farm on their own. A challenge has been land acquisition. So Easton actually has a really amazing program where they will help you get land for urban gardening and farming if you're in the Twin Towers neighborhood. The plot they were looking at actually fell right outside of the neighborhood, and so it was a bit of a challenge to get that land, but looks like we're a go for that. Again, like all farms, funding, startup costs, especially in urban areas, and then because they want to work directly with consumers, educating the consumers of why their prices are going to be a little bit higher than conventionally grown food because it will be organic. It is a worker co-op, and so they want to ensure that they're paying themselves and future workers a living wage. Challenges in general, so we primarily focus on urban farms, and so that is our perspective and what the challenges are. Similar to all farmers, the expenses of infrastructure when you're starting up, particularly in urban areas, working with the the city to zone things accordingly and the costs that come with that. Making consumers familiar with both specialty and organic and regenerative ag practices so they see the true value that these farms are bringing to the food. And then back office and admin work, like they want to be out in the field or out in their greenhouses growing. And so figuring out how you do the marketing and the invoices and bookkeeping and keeping up with all of that can be a bit of a challenge as well. And then finally, how this all connects. So we are working to build a just economy that works for all with both Gem City Market, our farm cooperatives, and lots of other cooperatives by leveraging their talents and resources to solve the challenge of access to locally grown food. Co-op Dayton's role in that is by building this amazing network of all different types of co-ops and creating opportunities for them to connect with one another, because we're trying to make sure that as much as the local dollar stays in Dayton and the greater Dayton area as possible. And that ties back into P6, so cooperation amongst cooperatives, not just farm and grocery store cooperatives, but how can the doulas support the Gem City Market Project by offering resources to moms in the market, and how can the Community Land Trust make sure that the land and housing remains affordable so the community members who are members of the market and consumers of all these different amazing projects can stay in the community. And that's the last slide.
And P6 is co-op speak for Principle 6 of the International Co-op Principles, which is cooperation, as Cherrelle said, cooperation among cooperatives. Yes, we're ready to take questions. I saw that there were some in the chat. Alex, I think you're going to ask us questions, right? But I'll just point out this picture is of a Gem City Market annual meeting. So you can see we're really committed to democracy. This is people voting. So you use the red and green cards to do kind of voting when you're in that big annual meeting setting. So, but we're thrilled to take questions.
That's fantastic. I have a number of questions myself personally, but just to stick to what we've got in the chat, I'm going to start reading them off, and either of you can jump in whenever you're ready. So the first question is, how did local governments help with startup of Gem City, state and federal level support?
Absolutely. So, early on, we were just a ragtag group of community members, and it took some time for us to build credibility. We had a really big idea, and I think it wasn't clear at the very beginning that we would have, the wherewithal to get there. But once we started to really build that community support and that grassroots support, then government support really followed. So the city of Dayton was an early champion, including giving us an early small grant to do some of our initial market study work, as well as Montgomery County was also, so the city and county gave us sort of matched pre-development grants way at the beginning. And then over time, as we built out the model, raised the additional capital, both the city and the county were able to use development funds to give us grants of support as part of our capital campaign. The state also, through a partnership with Sinclair Community College, the state was able to provide some capital funds. So in return, Sinclair Community College students will have opportunities for internships, and they will be able to use our teaching kitchen and our community room and do kind of like hands-on education at the market. And so Sinclair was able, through some state funding, to participate in our capital campaign as well. The city has also provided us with other support, including, kind of helping. We're first-time land developers, so helping us kind of walk through the development process. And I can say, like Cherrelle mentioned a few times, that zoning has been a challenge for the urban agriculture. It's clear to me that when a city, is committed and has the wherewithal to help, they can really do it. And I think Dayton is starting to kind of put the pieces in place to really help grassroots community folks navigate those complex zoning issues. The city of Dayton has also done a lease of some land near the market for us that we can use as additional parking. So they've really been very supportive. And then we did get federal grant dollars through HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. weird, random, there was a grant from 1999 that had not fully been used from HUD to the local housing authority. And the local housing authority, with support from both of our US senators, was able to convince HUD, national HUD, to allow them to reallocate that towards our project. So that was like the final piece of financing that made the project actually possible.
Great, thank you. That's a wonderful answer. I'm really happy to hear too that Dayton is so on board with this. It's such an important investment for the city and for the community and broadly that I'm just really encouraged to hear that.
There's room for improvement on urban agriculture.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is. Yeah. I'm going to skip my question. I do have a question about food sovereignty, but I'll come back to that just so everyone else can ask you guys. The next one I'm going to say is, are OSU and CSU Extension working with any new producers or farmers who plan to sell at the grocery store?
Yes. So that we have a new general manager who has really taken over all of the kind of procurement and farm relationship pieces of the project. So I'm not as up to the minute as I was maybe a few months ago, but I know that OSU has offered their GAP training in Dayton a few times, and whenever they offer it, they always call us and say, hey, do you have producers who are going to be, vending to the market who you want to have included in those GAP trainings? And then CSU, I believe, is working with Edgemont Solar Gardens, which is a really, significant Dayton urban farm that has longstanding urban farm that's really kind of coming back from a little bit of a lull, and they're really rebuilding their program. And I know CSU is supporting them, and we really hope to vend from them. So I think the answer is yes, but I don't have all the details.
Yeah, and I think CSU's incubator that they're launching will be a big help as we try to get to that 20% goal. And we just started conversations with them to help us do some research on how other cities are zoning mushroom farms. And so they've been really supportive with Guided by Mushrooms.
Great, wonderful. Another question is, does any of this link to sort of youth education, K through 12 schools, both? I think I'd elaborate on this question. I'd say both with education around healthy eating and or, gardening efforts for kids.
So a big part of Gem City Gardens business model is creating some sort of educational training and workshops that schools will be able to take advantage of. And Guided by Mushrooms is currently in conversations with Dayton Public Schools about their urban ag track. And so hoping to figure out how we can include mushroomscaping, because it's mostly landscaping, into their curriculum, and if there's opportunities for it to expand.
At Gem City Market, we have a number of partners who will be doing educational program geared towards youth, but we really, I think one area for future development is more connection with Dayton Public Schools. We have a lot of Dayton Public Schools stakeholders, including, one of the school board members was actually like a founding member of Co-op Dayton, and another one of the school board members was one of the original organizers who actually, when I mentioned that 1,200 person survey, one of the Dayton school board members was actually one of the people who went out and did that survey with people as an organizer. So we have all of those relationships. We just need to now take the next step and figure out how do we connect more deeply with Dayton Public Schools. We will be having an after school program 5 days a week, an after school snacks program where kids can stop in. And we're very close to both Emerson and a charter Dayton Leadership Academy. So we want to do all of that, but still to come.
Great, thanks. I also want to make a comment to anyone who's not looking at the chat right now. There's some really interesting resources and conversation that's happening on the sidebar. For Lela and Cherrelle, I'm going to do something that you might not want to do for yourselves and just kind of plug Gem City and say definitely if somebody hasn't already joined as a member or donated, I'd really definitely urge you to do it. It's such an important thing to support. So the link is now in the chat box to their pages. So definitely check it out after this. But jumping back into those questions, the next one I had ready was from someone in Cincinnati, actually, and they said this is exactly what they're hoping to do in Cincinnati. So speaking maybe to any of the co-op movement down there would be helpful, but then specifically, are you planning to study impacts of this fabulous health market?
So Cincinnati question first. So we have amazing partners in Cincinnati. They were just in town yesterday touring the Gem City market, and we went out and had like drinks on the patio with them, which is the first time I've had like any social engagement in months. It was really, really heart filling and wonderful. Cincinnati Union Co-op Initiative, which is now called Co-op Cincy. So we're Co-op Dayton, they're Co-op Cincy. They have been around for 5 years longer than we have. They have a working worker owned farm. I think they farm on like 4 acres. They have a CSA box. They have a food hub. I mean, they are like extremely well developed. So Co-op Cincy, I would point you to them, and I'm happy to make introductions. In terms of studying the impact, so we're working right now with a group of UD faculty, University of Dayton faculty from the Hanley Sustainability Institute. Actually, again, I'll give a shout out to Tony Dosick, who helped kind of start this relationship with the faculty at UD, but they're working on taking kind of how will they do program assessment, like how to evaluate whether or not we're successful. And so they've built out kind of some key performance metrics. One thing that's really hard is like, how do you measure the direct health impact? So in other cities where there's been a grocery store that's opened in a place that hasn't had grocery in a while, they have been able to kind of track things like BMI, like body mass index, calorie intake, things like that. But in a lot of cases, it's a really kind of mixed, foggy picture because there's just so many factors. So we'll be trying to do some of that, and we'll be using a lot of like food recall. So dietetics grad students are going to be studying, like they'll be asking people like what did you eat in the 24-hour period, and they'll be comparing kind of folks who have access to the Gem City market with folks who don't. And then they're also going to be studying things like, we're going to be able to give them access to our point of sale data. Like, what are people buying? Are they buying things? So there's the thing called the Thrifty Food Plan through the US Department of Agriculture, which is like healthy food on a budget, and they have sort of categories of food. And so they'll be measuring things like, with our pricing structure, can people actually meaningfully buy like a nutritious week of meals on a budget, and in particular on a food stamps budget. So those are the kinds of things that UD will be helping us measure. And fingers crossed it looks good, but I think the idea is like, if we're not meeting those metrics, then like, how can we pivot and change? So.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna circle back. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left for questions, then we'll have one more break before our final panel today. So I'm gonna jump back up to a question I skipped that was actually my own question. And I specifically was curious to ask both of you sort of, if you could discuss, sort of unpack the concept of food sovereignty for us, and really discuss sort of how both the local growing movement, so the production side for farmers, and then also the consumer movement, having that choice for what you're eating plays into the work you guys are doing.
You want to go first, Cherrelle?
Sure. I was like, is she going to take herself off mute? Yeah, I see it as like everyone, regardless of income or identity, deserves the right to have access to healthy food that's culturally appropriate. I think in the context of producers, that's what both Gem City Gardens and Guided by Mushrooms are really about, like being able to grow healthy, nutritious food close to where people are, especially people who don't have access to this food, in a very dense amount. So in the 1,500 square feet that Guided by Mushrooms was growing in, they're producing about 200 pounds of mushrooms per week. And so being able to produce that much quantity that can be used in a variety of dishes, they grow different strains that are used commonly in different cultural dishes. It is really important to the movement that we're trying to build, but also to the missions of the organizations.
Yeah, and I think of sovereignty, kind of on a few different levels. I mean, the fact that when you have a Kroger in your neighborhood, or when you have an Aldi in your neighborhood, you have really no stake, you have no decision-making power in whether or not that Kroger or that Aldi stays and goes. I mean, you can vote with your dollars, and that's important, but built into the bylaws of Gem City Market is community sovereignty. So I mentioned that the workers own 70% of the business. So let's imagine that in 10 years, we are wildly successful. We're doing like Whole Foods level revenue, and we're just humming along. And those 25, 30 workers who own 70% of the business, they decide, we want to cash in. We're going to sell to Whole Foods, or we're going to close and sell the building. Written into our bylaws is the members of the community actually have a veto over that. So it's really, to me, that is sovereignty, right? That is like the people who live in the neighborhood who have the most at stake, the people who currently live in the neighborhood who have put their skin in the game and helped develop this concept. They have the power to determine the future of this market. I think it's going to be, bricks and mortar retail is definitely not a slam dunk. Like, we're going to have to really fight for our market share. And it's going to be really important that everyone feels welcome and that everyone wants to shop with us. But we have just really built in these mechanisms for community power and control. For example, anybody can be a member of the co-op. So if you live in, Athens or Columbus or Cleveland, you can still become a member. But our board seats, there's 3 community board seats. 2 of those 3 have to live in our immediate trade area. So it's like local sovereignty, local power. I also think, when we think of local food sovereignty, living wages, the ability to actually have enough money to buy, healthy, appropriate, delicious food. That's one of the reasons that worker ownership is so compelling. My background is in the labor movement. So I kind of got into this work more for the worker, more for the worker power and living wages than I did for the food justice. But, the 2 things are pretty inseparable. So I do see this as kind of a community sovereignty, community self-determination project on a lot of different levels. And even when we talk about our teaching kitchen and our, all of the different tools that we have kind of created for the community to use, we always try to really emphasize this idea that this is about community skill building. It's not like we are going to teach you how to cook. It's like, how can we create a space where members of our community can share their gifts and talents with each other? It's not about empowerment, because the power is already in the community. The gifts, the talents, the power are already there. And we're just trying to build an asset that can be leveraged and used to, bring those gifts and talents to the surface and make our neighborhoods more resilient.
Great, thank you. I have one other question for you, and I don't know if you can both answer this or just Lela, but that last picture you showed was really just beautiful and kind of spoke to the concept of democracy, as you said, with all of the members being able to have that vote. How are you guys voting virtually these days? How is that happening?
We've moved our community meetings to Zoom. And we do a lot of surveying on Zoom, which is not very scientific because there's no way you're forced to take the survey. We actually didn't have an annual meeting last year. Our annual meeting would have been we were essentially planning our annual meeting when COVID hit. And so we interpreted our bylaws to say that because we weren't at that time, we couldn't figure out how to it was just early on, we didn't know how to use Zoom that well yet. So we skipped an annual meeting, and we're actually planning our next annual meeting right now. And I think it's going to be a challenge, and we're still figuring it out. I come out of the labor movement, union movement, and I've was a parliamentarian twice for the Communication Workers of America National Convention, which is 10,000 members coming together to vote. And they used a number of different mechanisms, including, a lot of heavy use of Robert's Rules of Order. And then they used a lot of electronic voting mechanisms. So I'm sure we can figure it out. That's a long way of saying I don't know yet, but we will do it.
Yeah, and we have to figure out how to do voting in an equitable way. Because one thing we've run across, especially trying to run our programming this year, is people don't have laptops, they don't have access to internet. And so, how do, like, similar things are happening in rural areas? How do we democratize the tools of technology so that people can participate in programming and governance for the cooperatives?
Yeah, it's very noticeable. I live in the east side of Dayton, and we work with a lot of folks who live in West Dayton, and the lack of high-speed internet, or like the lack of sort of bandwidth in West Dayton, like the digital redlining is so apparent when you start working with people who are trying to get on your meeting and they're trying to participate and they're constantly getting booted off, or they're freezing, or, they're on their phone, or, like definitely very stark.
Yeah, that has to be quite a barrier. One last question before I let us break. So we're going to break here at 12:45 before the last panel. And I do urge everyone just to go through, scroll the chat. There are a lot of good links and contact information in here for everyone to follow up on this conversation. Last question is from Krista, and it is, what are some of the biggest lessons you both learned so far?
There are so many. I would say, redoubling our efforts to reach really tough to reach community members. So when we first started our membership drive, as I said, like we did a lot of things right. We invested in community organizing. We sat up, we went to bus stops, we went to churches, we went to, community groups. But after we'd been recruiting members for about a year, so in 2018, we did a deep dive into our membership. We used some GIS software to kind of map where people lived. And what we found was that less than half of our members actually lived in the neighborhoods that we were most intent on impacting. And so we had to make a pretty significant pivot in how we organize based on that data. And we really doubled down. We partnered with Premier Health to do a 50-50 match for people who live in our immediate trade area to just make it more affordable, the membership. We did a lot more canvassing and door to door. We changed the way, this was subtle, but we changed the look and feel of our social media. We changed who was in all the pictures and who was kind of put in the forefront. Because what we found is just there were a lot of folks who maybe either had never heard of us, or they had heard of us, but they weren't really sure that we were for them. Like a food co-op didn't seem like it was for them. So we had to really redouble that message of like, this is a conventional grocery store for everyone. It's not like, college campus, natural and organic. This is like, we will have natural and organic, but it's for everyone. You will have a price point that works for you. And so we spent, 2019 really focused on that organizing. And then just really at the end of 2019 is when we finally crossed the threshold of having the majority of our members. So I think it's now over 1,800 members who are in our like immediate neighborhood. So that feels good,
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson for me is don't be attached to anything. Any idea, any resource, like it can be gone tomorrow, and just be willing to pivot, especially with guided by mushrooms. My background is in higher ed. I love structure and rules and steps, and this is how you get it done. And they completely blew my mind, being able to make close to $90,000 in the middle of a pandemic without a contract for anything, just showing up to people's doorsteps like, here, tasty mushrooms, try them. And so just, there is no right way to do it, just get it done.
Can I answer the question in the chat that I just saw about our pricing structure, since I sort of hinted at that? And this has been an exciting couple weeks because we've been building out our pricing. So we are 70% conventional, 30% organic. That's our overall product mix. And the 30% isn't just organic, but it's like organic, specialty, kind of natural. So it's predominantly it's predominantly conventional. So when you look at any given product category, and actually the shelf tags are already up in the store, so you can go and you can actually see every product category. There'll always be at least one product that is at or below Kroger price, and we're actually going out and like checking prices at Aldi, Kroger, you know, those places. So you'll like in the peanut butter category, there'll always be one peanut butter option that is like very aggressively priced. And typically that'll be our private label. We have 3 levels of private label. We have Always Save, which is like the super low cost. It's kind of equivalent to the Kroger Wow. And then we have Best Choice, which is like more of a just conventional generic brand. And then we have Simply, which is the private label organic. And so in every category, you'll have at least one super aggressively priced, either Best Choice or Always Save, that like is at or below Kroger. But then we'll also have a couple of your national brands, your Kraft, your Skippy, your Jif, we're in the peanut butter world. And then we'll also have a couple of higher end, your like, all natural peanut butter and your organic peanut butter. And we will have it'll be a little bit more, if you're like a pure organic shopper, it'll be a little bit more expensive to shop at Gem City Market than it would to shop at Kroger. But if you are like a very price sensitive, like, price is the most important thing, it will be price competitive. So we're kind of like a little bit cross subsidizing. Like we see the people who are coming in really wanting to prioritize like natural organic specialty, we think of them as solidarity shoppers, and they're coming not just for the food, but also because they want to support the mission. So that's the idea, is like blending those margins so that we can be sustainable.
I kind of want to just piggyback on that question Lauren asked. Are you guys, and we may have discussed this in the past, but will the market label foods as such? So will you have things labeled as like organic or local, or where they come from?
We do. We will have the local designation there'll be shelf tags that are labeled as, like I think I said before, there'll be shelf tags that say West Dayton, Ohio, or Miami Valley. And then in terms of organic, most of those products do themselves say organic. So we won't have shelf tags that say organic, but we will have, in partnership with Premier Health, we will have shelf tags that say like diabetes friendly or low sodium. So we'll have some health related shelf tags. And then we'll have shelf tags that indicate that things are made by a co-op, if they're made by a co-op, just for that principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives. And I think we're going to try to do things like, this is fun. Our general manager is really committed. We're opening with some basics, but we want to know what our shoppers want. So she's got a program called You Want It, We'll Try It. And so if there's something that you really like that you don't see on the shelves, she is committed to ordering it, no matter what it is. She'll order it for at least 3 months. And if you're okay with it, there'll be a tag that actually says like, Alex from Yellow Springs, like requested this item, and it'll be on the shelf for 3 months. And if it takes off and there are sales, we'll keep it. And if not, we'll move on and we can special order it for you in the future. But so there'll be lots of different, and then I think we're also going to have staff picks. Like, so you might have a shelf tag that says like, Leah loves this peanut butter or whatever. So those are the shelf tags we'll have.
I love that idea. I think that's such a cool way for just building community and kind of sharing that knowledge of like, just, who likes what and why. I think that's a really nice way to do it. Okay, well, I think we're pretty close to time, unless anybody has a single last question that's absolutely. Cherrelle and Lela, I don't know if we've already seen your emails put in here today, but if maybe you would both throw those back in. I think that you've got a lot of good questions from folks, and there's probably ongoing conversation to have. So if you don't mind sharing that in the chat box, and then what we'll go ahead and do is take just a quick break. I'll say let's just do a quick 15-minute break, I think is where we're at. And then at 3 o'clock, we're going to start our final panel of the day. It's a shift to local stories from all over Ohio. So bringing in a few more voices for that. And we won't keep you too late today, and then we'll see you all soon. So I'll stick around here if anybody has any questions or just wants to continue this conversation, and then we'll see everyone in about 15 minutes.